dominant cultural authority of our time is arguably science. More specifically, the idea that science can answer all of our questions and cure all of our ills. But can it? Science is the physical investigation of the material world, and throughout its historical development, there have largely been two competing underlying worldviews about the universe that ultimately influence how we interpret scientific data. Is the universe created by God, or is it just a happenstance product of natural forces? On this episode of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, we bring together two scholars to discuss science and Christianity. Philosopher and agnostic Dr. Michael Ruse and philosopher and Christian Dr. Paul Copan join us to discuss their latest book, a collection of essays, Three Views on Christianity and Science.
Well, welcome to the April edition of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. We are a monthly gathering of both believers and skeptics, respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. My name is James Walker. I'm the co-host, co-founder of the book club, along with Bill Cluck, who's the former Christian, now atheist. He's our other co-founder. He's not with us this evening, but is going to be listening in later. I am also the president of Watchman Fellowship, an evangelical Christian apologetics ministry, focusing mostly on interfaith evangelism and related issues. The book club's been going about 4 years now. We used to meet in person, have a meal together, but with the pandemic, we've moved over to Zoom. There's some pluses and minuses. We don't have quite the fellowship that we had in sharing a meal and having time together. But the good thing is we've been able to expand geographically through this, and we've had participants as far away as Africa and India. So we're excited about today. Got a great book and two authors. That's unusual for the book club at the same time, both an agnostic and a Christian author. Before I tell you about that, though, I did want to take just a moment to talk to you about last month's book club. Our last book club, I should say. We skipped last month, but our last book club is now on video. So if you go to atheistchristianbookclub.com, you can watch over a year's worth of past book clubs. Our last guest was Craig Keener, along with Pastor Dwayne Miller. Craig is the author of the book, a two-volume work, Miracles. We had a really good, interesting discussion about miracles, both New Testament miracles, modern day miracles as well. If you missed that, I want to encourage you to go check it out. And then I want to tell you about next month. Next month we're doing a four views book. We're going to be talking about four views on Christianity and philosophy. And our guest authors, we have two of them, will be Tim McGrew. Tim is a regular at our book club. We've had him several times, both in person and by Zoom. He is professor of philosophy at Western Michigan University. He is a contributor to the book, The Four Views on Christianity and Philosophy, which will be our feature book for May. Edited by Paul Gould. We were talking about Paul earlier before the meeting started. Tim argues in that book for the convergent model. How does philosophy relate with Christianity? He talks about that. Also joining us next month is going to be an atheist philosopher, Graham Oppy, from Australia, whose main area of research is philosophy of religion. He currently holds the post of professor of philosophy and associate dean of research at Monash University, and serves as CEO of the Australasia Association of Philosophy. And he's going to be discussing his view, which is the conflict model between Christianity and philosophy. So mark your calendars for that. We're going to be, the date's going to be May 6th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we're real excited about that. I think we're going to have a good meeting. But today's meeting is also very exciting. We have a special guest, two authors as well, and we're doing a similar book, Three Views on Christianity and Science. And our guests include Paul Copan. I know Paul, I've known him for, well, I guess, Paul, maybe about 7 or 8 years now, maybe longer. We speak together oftentimes in New Orleans, at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary at the Defend Conference. That's where I got to know Paul. Got to hear some great messages from him through the years. Paul has a PhD in philosophy from Marquette University, is professor of philosophy and ethics at Palm Beach Atlantic University, along with Paul Gould, which we talked about earlier, which we need to really hopefully get him on the book club sometime. He's the author of True for You But Not for Me. He's also author of How Do You Know You're Not Wrong, and also one of the first books I think I read from him, When God Goes to Starbucks, A Guide to Everyday Apologetics. So, and we'll find out from Paul, when God goes to Starbucks, what does he order? So hopefully that will be in the book as well. So, Paul, welcome to thanks for joining the Atheist and Christian Book Club.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the warm welcome.
No. So also with us is one of the other Paul, I should mention, was the co-editor of the book that we're looking at, Three Views on Science and Religion, along with Christopher Ruse, I think it was the other co-author,
right.
Co-editor rather. And then one of the authors of the book is with us as well, which is Michael Ruse. And I met Michael briefly in March of 2019 at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, following a Christian-atheist dialogue that he had with Christian philosopher Doug Geivett. We had a group from the book club, actually a whole set of people from the book club come over and go to that meeting, got to meet Dr. Ruse. Michael is an agnostic and skeptic, a British-born Canadian, specializes in philosophy of science, also a philosophy and biology, works in the relationship between science and religion, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about this evening, and the creation-evolution controversy as well. So now, Dr. Ruse, until very recently, I think he's just retired from taught at Florida State University in Tallahassee, and taught in the philosophy department there as well. So, Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, I really appreciate you guys.
We retirees look for any opportunity to talk to people, particularly during the pandemic. So, in fact, don't thank me. I'm thanking you.
Oh, well, we definitely appreciate that. Unfortunately, our other co-founder, the atheist component of that, Bill Cluck, was unable to be with us, as I mentioned earlier. He does have a question that he passed on to me. He's on the road this evening, but he passed on a question he'd like to share, and I'm going to do that later. But first of all, I wanted to open up with a couple of other questions, and then we will at some point open it up to the whole club to ask questions. If you do have a question, you want to get on the list right now, you can put it in the text. You can either put it in general text, or you can text it directly to either Brady Blevins or Brady, you got wave there on that, or Daniel. And thanks, Daniel. Daniel Ray and Brady Blevins are both kind of moderating the questions. So put your question in there, and then we're going to call up later. But being the co-founder, I take the privilege of asking the first couple of questions to get us started. So question for Paul. Many are, if not most of the atheists that are part of our club, and we generally run about half and half as far as atheists and Christians that meet in the club. But I would say most of our club members would hold to maybe a fourth view of Christianity and science that I guess we could call the incompatible view, or I think you referred to it somewhere in the book as the warfare model or the warfare view. So I know the Zondervan series, that your book, the Three Views on Christianity and Science, is part of that Zondervan series on views, and the focus is generally in a Christian context, theology context. So maybe that view wouldn't fit that discussion too well, but I was going to ask you if we were going to try to get a balanced, scholarly representative to talk about maybe an incompatible model, the idea that science and Christianity are totally incompatible, or even warfare model. Does anybody come to mind who might be a good atheist or agnostic to speak to that?
I would say that the person who at least is the most vocal proponent of that view would be somebody like a Richard Dawkins. I know that Michael had said, endorsing actually Alistair McGrath's book, The Dawkins Delusion, said that Richard Dawkins his book makes me embarrassed to be an atheist, and he can comment on that. But I think we'd avoid folks like the new atheist sorts who seem to be very, just immersed in their own rhetoric, immersed in their own arguments, and don't really flex at all with any kind of input, even from the atheistic side, that challenges some of their over-the-top claims and rhetoric. I actually had the opportunity to ask Richard Dawkins a question when he was speaking down here at Nova Southeastern University back in 2011. And I was the first one up to the microphone, and I asked him, I said, Professor Dawkins, in your book, River Out of Eden, you said, I'm taking a little bit more time here, but this is kind of a fun Richard Dawkins story. So I asked him, I said, given the fact that given the view that you take that we're all dancing to the music of our DNA and that the universe nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, no good or evil and so forth, I said, if the theist and the naturalist or atheist, according to you, believe what we do based on material forces over which we have no control, how is it that you can say that the naturalist is more rational than the theist if we're both dancing to the music of our DNA? And so he went on to spin off a few arguments, and then this is his closing line. He says, and besides, he says, science flies rockets to the moon, but religion flies planes into buildings. That was his rhetorical line. Of course, it made no sense. The Muslim terrorists were simply dancing to the music of their DNA, so he didn't answer the question. So we wouldn't want Dawkins to take that kind of position. Somebody like a Richard Lewontin would perhaps be, he can be very, very strident in his own materialism and so forth, but he would be one who would take that view. Jerry Coyne would be another. So we could perhaps include them in that. But I think that voice is often very strident. And I think it's become clear that, that the historiography of that conflict view has been pretty much rejected by historians of science. They just don't see that as a viable model, even though it's touted by people like Richard Dawkins as being this inherent conflict.
Perhaps both Christians and atheists have their own problems with the fundamentalist element of their system.
Can I just interrupt just for a moment?
Yes, please.
Not to criticize, but I'm really interested in Dawkins' response that we can put rockets on the moon, you fly planes into buildings. It shows so clearly what I've been arguing for a long time. This isn't an epistemological debate. This is not a theory of knowledge debate. This is a moral debate. We are plunged so completely and utterly into the question of, ought one to be a Christian? Is it a moral thing to be a Christian? Or is it better morally to be an atheist? And this comes through so clearly in the writing of Dawkins. For him, it's, I say they've made, I personally think they've made Darwinism into a religion, but it's so clearly that we're not just arguing about facts here. We are arguing about moral issues. And, there's a long tradition of this. Plato started it. Plato said we should lock up all atheists and feed them only by slaves, and when they die, bury them outside the city. So it's always been a moral issue. So, Paul, have you written this down? Because I'm going to quote it, whether you have or not.
Yes, I actually had a recording of it, but somebody hacked into the place where where I did the blogging, and so they redid everything, but without the audio, which I had recorded. So I'll see if I can dig that up. But that was basically, I've quoted it a number of times since then. But that was yeah. We'll touch base later. I'll get that to you.
Okay.
And I have just a contribution to that rockets comment. Paul, you probably know this. I'm sure, Michael, you know this as well. But the rocket that got us to the moon was designed by a guy who flew rockets into London to kill people.
Right,
Yes,
the Nazis invented them.
Yeah. So,
you don't have to tell. Listen, I was born in 1940 in Birmingham, England.
Yeah.
And when I was 3 months old, my family were bombed out of their house. My father came home to find my mother sitting on the sidewalk on an orange box, holding her baby because the Germans had bombed the house. So you don't have to tell me about that one.
Yeah, no, you're from the, my mother was born the same time. Of course, she wasn't in Germany, but yeah, that's just, that's something, I've heard that Dawkins quote a lot, and it just reminds me of Werner von Braun and how God redeemed him, and he ended up.
I know.
Yeah. So, but it's harrowing story to hear people firsthand experience that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well,
Before we go any further, Brady, are you in Greece? I'm looking at your background.
No, sir. I am. No, I'm in Texas. But the background.
Mean Texas has taken the whole of Greece and reconstructed it there?
No, this is the theater in Bet Shan in Israel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a graphic image, but it's pretty cool. You should
Pretty
see
nice,
his
though.
collection. You should see his other collection. His collection is pretty
I
fun.
A poor man's vacation.
I can show you the bathroom in Bet Shan if you would like. So
Yeah. What I'm waiting for is a picture of you against clouds and everybody else is playing a harp. Okay. Sorry.
Well, we've there are all kinds of difficulties with even addressing that more strident, warfare paradigm. Much less trying to get it as a chapter or section in your views book. But you did cover, I think, very well 3 views, and I think that you would find Christians in all 3 of those views. And so, Paul, could you take just a moment and just name, the independence view, which is Dr. Ruse's view, and others, the 3 views that are covered in the book, and then I want to get into some more detail on it before we open it up to everybody.
Okay, yeah. Well, of course, the conflict view, the warfare motif. There's the independence view that Michael takes, that he sees and he can talk about it himself, but seeing them speaking 2 different languages, speaking in about 2 different realms that don't intersect. Alistair McGrath, the theologian, takes the dialogue view, and he uses the imagery of the 2 books, the book of God's word and God's works in the natural world, in creation, and that these are to be in conversation with one another, that the same God reveals himself through both those natural and special revelation. And so they ought to be in conversation with each other. And then Bruce Gordon of Houston Baptist University takes the constrained integration view. He thinks that the dialogue view is too weak, and he thinks that there is a much greater fitting together of those puzzle pieces. And he takes a stronger view of integration than Alistair McGrath does. That's the gist of it.
Yeah, that's a great overview, and I really like the section at the end too, when you kind of went over the highlights of all 3 of the positions, and the addendum at the back when you talked about the problem of evil and other things. I think was a way of tying together of how that reflects in whichever view you happen to take. I do want to know, Paul, which of the view do you personally line up with more, or do you have a nuance in a different direction?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to somewhere between Alistair McGrath and Bruce Gordon. I do think that there is room for a rich conversation, but I think that I would go a bit more strongly than Alistair McGrath would.
Okay. Now, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Michael, but when I was seeing that, and I'm going to get you to comment. Everybody else does, right? So, but your particular view, the part of it. First of all, I really enjoyed the spirit of it and the kindness that you reflected. You obviously want to communicate, and you are maybe the anti-Richard Dawkins. But before I ask you specifically about that, I did want a little bit of a verification. I had initially said you were an atheist philosopher, but then I noticed that you were self-identifying in the book more with the title of skeptic or agnostic. So I was wondering, have you refined your own position, or are you just trying to be a little more accurate on the labeling? I know Dawkins himself has kind of shifted over to saying there probably is no God rather than there is no God. So could you, first of all, kind of say, would you label yourself more agnostic or more atheist?
Well, I suppose I'd call myself an agnostic, but, my whole life has been, what shall I say, not clouded, but informed by the fact that I was brought up as a Quaker in the years after the Second Year War, when it was so difficult to be a pacifist. So as a child, I spent an awful lot of time not reciting, dogma, not reading the Bible, but arguing about things like morally ought one to be a pacifist or not. And I think that this has been the most important thing in my life, that all my life I have been questioning and trying to see both sides and realizing that so often we don't know what the answer is, that we can try it, but life's a mystery. And of course, Quakers are into mysticism. That's what makes it exciting. So I am an agnostic, but so many more agnostics are like my wife, who just find the whole question so boring, they don't want to think about it at all. Whereas I'm like Julian Huxley, let's say, or Thomas Henry Huxley, who's obsessed with the question. I work on it all the time. And my guru, if anybody, is J.B.S. Haldane, who said, the world is not only queerer than I think it is, but queerer than I could think it is. And that's the kind of agnostic I am, not a static one, but one who is absolutely overwhelmed by the mystery of the existence that I've got. And I think you've got too, because I'm not so much of a Cartesian totally to deny the existence of the rest of you.
Well, it's one of the things I really kind of like about the book club. It's really shaped up to where first of all, it's pretty unique in that I don't know of another one like it where you have that many atheists and Christians coming together each month to really try to hear the other side. So what I've noticed though is even though we're on totally opposite sides of the question, there's kind of an agreement with all of us that this is the question. God or the lack of God is the question that really answers all the other questions. And so,
but can I interrupt you, James?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm on totally the other side of you on the question about those sorts of things. When I worked on this book that we were doing, the three of us, I realized there were some things I was totally on the other side of. For instance, all the business of trying to prove the authenticity of the resurrection. Oh, it was women who went there, and in those days women did, so it must have been genuine. I'm totally out of that. But the kind of Christianity I come from regards that about as much contempt as I do. So in a way, when we talk about totally on the other side, for me, that's a very complex issue. I am totally on the other side about some things, like not the resurrection of Jesus, but that making it the basis of your faith, that it was literally true. So for me, but again, that's because I was raised as a Quaker. So in many respects, I'm not a believer. Don't pretend. I'm not about to say, oh my goodness, folks, here's the moment I'm going to tell you I believe. I'm not. But in so many respects, I'm just not on the other side.
Yeah. It's and I noticed that there were times in the book that you and I think you said as much, felt like in sometimes that you might be closer to maybe Alistair McGrath's position than Bruce Gordon was. So you did find connection points and things that you had in common, which I found to be interesting as well. So what it seemed to me at parts, though, is you were almost like trying to help Christians in the sense of, if I was getting the message, if you want to make Christianity work, you need to never blend the two of the science and the religion, and never try to. I think you would say at that point, if you try to prove something scientifically, you're doing bad science and bad philosophy, and I guess bad religion.
And bad religion.
Yeah. Right.
I'm a Kierkegaard.
So it's almost like a antimatter. You've got matter and antimatter. Don't let them touch.
Although I'm a philosopher, I have nothing to do with natural theology. I'm a total Kierkegaardian on this. If you believe because of a leap of faith, because it's absurd, because if anything, it goes against that. So do understand at that level, that's the sort of thing that I do oppose. And as I said, that's why this whole business of trying to prove that Jesus literally was resurrected, for me, is it makes Christianity rather second rate somewhere. That's the sort of thing. It's like, for me, if that's what your Christianity is, then I don't want any part to do with it. Let me just finish one more thing. I want to say I'm the same with the atheists too. I mean, there's so much things about Richard Dawkins' ideas I can't stand, but at the same time, I'm with him on my hatred of organized religion. Now, I've lived in the South for 20 years, so I know whereof I'm talking. But that's another thing. So at one level, I don't get on very well with any of you.
Maybe a little iconoclastic, but would you say that organized religion is better than unorganized religion?
No, I'd say no. I would say we're all better off without any. No, of course. Let's take Sophie Scholl, who was a Lutheran because of her Lutheran faith or what she got. For me, she is the biggest saint of the 20th century. I mean, without any question. And I'm fully prepared to say that she was motivated by her Lutheran faith. So please understand what I'm saying. But then I see the way that or Catholics too. I mean, I like the Pope, but then he comes out and says that homosexuals are disordered. And I pull back and say, oh my God, where am I? Where am I? Richard Dawkins, where do I sign up? And isn't that exciting? At 80 years old, I'm still mixed up.
Well, I think that could go for a lot of us. Thanks for the insight on that. And I did have another question for Paul. You were talking about the claim that Bruce Gordon makes about the Christian faith begins not with matter but with mind. I think this is in the last section there of the book, and you quote him saying, "Mind is foundational to reality, and matter is derivative." And then you talk a little bit about the strong versus weak idealism, but you add this: furthermore, it is rational minds that are required in order to study the material world. Behind Bruce's assertion is the idea that science depends on and points to God, and that naturalistic explanations are inadequate, not just outside science, but within science as well. So Paul, my question is, in what way do you think does Dr. Gordon contend that science is not only integrated to be integrated with God, but really depends on God?
Yeah, I think the fundamental assertion that we cannot begin with a materialistic view of the world precisely because mind is required to understand matter. Matter cannot understand matter, but rather mind is able to discern what is going on in the world of matter. So when we think of God as being a supremely self-aware being, a supreme mind, bestowing human beings with capacity to think, to study, to observe what is going on in the world, that there is an appropriate correlation, that the emergence of finite minds in this world is grounded on a mind independent of the universe, that consciousness coming out of non-conscious matter is acknowledged to be by Colin McGinn and other philosophers of mind to be something that is utterly baffling, a profound mystery. We know how planets were formed and so forth, but in terms of how consciousness, technicolor awareness could emerge from gray matter is something that is just astonishing. If God exists, that mystery is resolved, that the emergence of minds becomes highly probable if God exists. So
what would you say that that's just a variation of God of the gaps, that we just don't know how consciousness derived from inanimate matter, really, and so because we don't know, we're just apt to want to throw God into as the answer?
Well, I think what's helpful to do here is to look at the vast array of considerations, not merely mind. Let's throw in objective moral values. Michael mentioned Sophie Scholl, which is a very powerful story, a very moving one of someone who stood up to Hitler and sought to proclaim the truth with the White Rose Society in Munich. And it was she stood up for what was right and defied the powers that existed. We commend that moral impulse. It's not just merely a matter of survival and reproduction, but we're talking about objective moral values. And so objective moral values, beauty, consciousness, rationality, human dignity and worth. Does it make sense to say that these emerge from valueless, mindless, non-conscious, non-rational processes, or could there be some sort of explanation that actually connects all of those pieces, that unites them? Something like God would be a marvelous explanation, a suitable explanation for that, bringing all of those features of the universe and of human experience together. So I think looking at the entire picture and in terms of what offers the better explanatory power is I think a more constructive way of going about this, an inference to the best explanation, I would say.
Well, thanks for that. Hey, Daniel, Brady.
So no doubt of the gaps in
right.
this consideration. I'm looking at what worldview offers the best context or the most natural fit between that metaphysical backdrop and the phenomenon in consideration. So that's, I'd say, theism offers a much more natural fit than a naturalistic worldview does.
If you don't have that, then whatever we come up with is totally arbitrary. It's not based on really anything. It's just chance.
But Paul, can I interrupt?
Sure.
2 years later, your God let Anne Frank die in Bergen-Belsen. Now, how do you connect that one with the vision that you've just given me? I mean, you've talked about...
Great question.
Scholl, and it must have been the only way you can explain this is through your God, your Christian God. And yet 2 years later, Sophie Scholl dies in Bergen-Belsen of typhoid. Yeah. Now, how do you explain that one?
Well, I'd say a better context for explaining these sorts of things than, say, a naturalist does. Keep in mind, of course, that that everyone has to come to terms with the problem of evil. It's not just a particularly theistic consideration. Everyone has to grapple with the problem of evil. And the question is, which worldview does the best job or has the best resources for making sense of the existence of evil? Now, I know that you have mentioned that that morality is of course, a corporate illusion fobbed off on us by our genes to get us to cooperate. I don't know if you have revised that view, but given that kind of a view, which doesn't really have space for talking about objective moral evil, I'd say theism does have a context for that and thus makes better sense of the existence of evil given that there is an objective moral standard, a design plan from which evil is a departure. Evil is a departure from the way things ought to be. But given, say, a naturalistic outlook, given if nature is all the reality that there is, it's hard to see why anything ought to be anyway. So well, that's what I'd say.
But I'm just not convinced. You see, I go back to the Dostoevsky thing in Brothers Karamazov. If the only way we're going to put it all right is by having Anne Frank die in Bergen-Belsen in order to have the rest of us in the whole eschatological thing and salvation and everything, I don't want any part of it. I just don't want any part of it.
Well, on your view, it's pretty much tough luck. Too bad, Anne Frank. Oh, well.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
Yeah. I'd say I have a much richer moral understanding of these. I think theism offers a much richer moral understanding of, yes, is a problem of evil a problem? Sure, it's the leading problem that theists face, but the agnostic or the atheist is not off the hook, on this, because we have to ask the question: which worldview offers us any sort of a moral framework? Well, a naturalistic one simply doesn't, and I'd say, well, so much the worse for naturalism.
Well,
is our audience members allowed to jump in here?
Go ahead. We have some other people lined up, but I want you to go ahead and do that if you could for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I think from my perspective, there's an equivocation going on when using the term evil, because I, as a naturalist, I'd rather not use the term evil. I prefer to use the term like suffering. Why is there extreme suffering, especially among animals, even that predated human suffering, for example? That the evolution has no problem explaining that. That just is a consequence of natural processes, right? But it's a steeper burden on theism, because there are claims about God being a God of love, and that He sustains His creation. And in Psalms, it talks about God provides for all His creatures and gives them everything they need. So I could quote, I think it's Psalm 104. I don't have the exact
quote. It is Psalm 104, yeah.
Right. So there are certain claims within theism that make a challenge to theism. Forget about coming in from the outside as an agnostic or an atheist. There are problems internally within theism, I think, that are difficult to answer. And so that's kind of, and mixing in the whole moral problem, I want to get away from that. Let's just talk about the problem of natural suffering, especially among animals that predated humans before the fall, before any theological, Genesis thing happened. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, I would jump in by saying that. I suppose I could ask the question: someone like Hitler or Himmler, as Michael Ruse likes to bring up, that these are. Did they have any sort of a moral obligation not to engage in the acts in which they participated? Is there, in terms of your own, say, framework, I don't know if you take a moral realist framework, but are there any moral obligations?
Well, I might have my own thoughts about what makes for a better world or a worse world, but that's immaterial in terms of whether theism or naturalism is true or not. I mean, if we want to get to whether naturalism is true, if the world sucks and we just live in and there's no way to give a foundation to my moral preferences, that's immaterial as to whether it's true or not. I mean, what I like to be true or not is immaterial.
It's not a matter of liking. I think it's a matter of which worldview makes sense of our basic human experience. And I'd say morality, objective moral values, are a huge part of our own, as Michael himself has indicated. If we don't want to ascribe, if we don't ascribe evil to what Hitler and Stalin and my grandfather died of starvation in Ukraine because of Stalin. So I can connect with some of the things that Michael is saying in terms of the losses in the Second World War era. But I'd say we do have some basic, a basic moral framework by which we can make certain inferences about the, a moral fabric that is bound up with the world. And the question then is, if we do have these strong moral intuitions about Hitler and Stalin and so forth, and those are objectively true, what makes the best sense of them? So it's not a matter, it's just a matter of, an unshakable part of our own human experience that Dostoevsky, as Michael was talking about, brought up. I think we see that we live in a deeply moral world, but on naturalism, I think naturalism basically forfeits forfeits a hearing if it's going to reject objective moral values, if it's going to reject a moral framework by which to judge someone like Hitler or Stalin. So I think that's a fundamental starting point. And again, we come back to the question, if we do live in a universe that is shot through with moral considerations, issues of moral character and so forth that we recognize, which framework offers us the best context for affirming that? I'm not saying that answers all of our, but which framework does the best job of offering a context for it? And I'd say that the existence of a good God does offer us a context, whereas naturalism does not have that kind of a context to inform us about how to make sense of the Hitlers and Stalins of this world. I think just merely talking about suffering doesn't go deep enough. Anyway.
James, I have a
conversation. Go ahead.
Yeah.
James, I had a thought that is more along the lines of the science on the table for Michael, and then Paul, if he wants to address it as well. Michael, you mentioned in the book on page 33, I think it was, in your opening chapter, something that reminded me of the philosopher Thomas Nagel in his 2012 book, Mind and Cosmos. You've said something similar about, I don't want the Christian God to exist. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, I'd love to hear more about what you mean there. But the question in relation to science that I had for you as I was reading your chapter, do you think there is a moral quality or fabric or ethos to what we would consider to be the modern scientific endeavor? And on naturalism's account, how would you account for an ethical quality? As you said at the beginning of our talk, how would you account for the ethical quality of science if you would ascribe a kind of ethic or a moral quality to science? If that makes sense, I can rephrase that.
It makes sense. It makes me uncomfortable. If I were a Christian, I'd be quite happy to say science is a moral endeavor, because if we're made in the image of God, then I see this as meaning two things: that we have an intellect to find out about the world, and we have a moral sense to do what is right. And so for me, doing science for a Christian is a deeply religious thing to do. I mean, call it moral or whatever it is. I think it's a Christian duty to do. Not all of us are going to do science, but doing science as a whole, I think, is a deeply Christian obligation. So I've got no problems about that. As far as I'm concerned, of course, I don't have that. So all I've got is, as I've said in my books, an existential thing. You know, we are condemned to freedom. We have to make these decisions. At 80, I look back on my life, and the funny thing is, the most important parable to me is the parable of the talents. That I've been given talents and I've expected to use them, and not to use them is at some level I've let my non-existent God down. And so I feel very strongly, it's not just science, it's doing philosophy, it's doing this sort of thing, taking life seriously and trying to understand why we're here, what we should do, how it all works. So yes, at some level, I want to say it is moral. I think it's an obligation as a human being. But don't forget, I'm an agnostic. I'm not saying there's nothing. I'm not saying, well, if in fact God exists, then no, I don't even want to go there. I just want to say, here I am, thrust into the world, condemned to freedom. As far as I'm concerned, What am I going to do? I think there's a worthwhile way to live your life, and there's a non-worthwhile way to live your life. I mean, frankly, I think going on a Saturday afternoon and watching 30 young men beat their brains out on a football field for the rest of us, I think that's not a good thing. Others disagree, but I feel very strongly that there are certain things that here we are, we've got this opportunity, use them to the best that we can. You know, I can't say any more than that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that insight.
Michael, may I push back on one thing that you mentioned? I know that Bruce Gordon took you to task on this, and I would want to emphasize that the Quakerism with which you grew up, that would have thought that the objective evidence for the bodily resurrection of Jesus, that just was utterly irrelevant. But the Apostle Paul himself in 1 Corinthians 15 does list eyewitnesses, those who saw Jesus alive after his death, that more than 500 at one time, most of whom are still alive. Implication, you can go and ask them if you want. And Paul said that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, if his body rotted in the tomb, then there is no Christian faith. The faith you grew up with, it's ill-founded. It's irrelevant because it doesn't embrace the objective nature of the bodily resurrection of Jesus. So whether you like it or not, I think that simply is the claim that the Christian faith is making, and that without that bodily resurrection in history, there is no Christian faith.
Well, let me say two things. First of all, nobody has greater respect for me than Paul of Tarsus. When I read 1 Corinthians 13, I've already made this joke. When he and Richard Dawkins meet in heaven and they compare publications, and how do you compare 1 Corinthians 13 against the God delusion? I mean, there's no competition. So I'm a big booster of Paul. But on the other hand, I take the guy kind of carefully. When I see the things he says about homosexual, when I see the things he says about women, talk about women, okay? When I see the things he says about women, obey your husband, don't talk in church, all of these things. What am I supposed to say? Oh, yes, Paul, you're absolutely right. I don't believe in women preachers. I don't believe when I come home, I'm the man, I'm the dominant one. I tell my wife what to do. Give me a break. I mean, really, no. So I think you have to take all of these things in context. And so
sure, exactly.
There's something like that. I mean, it's like the whole question of substitutionary atonement. I don't buy that either, although, Paul pushes it. But as I say, I have terrific respect for Paul. A really terrific respect for Paul. But I put it in the context of when he was, who he was, all of these sorts of things. And I think that not to do so is an abrogation of my intellectual abilities. So if I were a Christian, I would think I'm letting the side down by taking Paul literally on everything he says. I mean, there's no way I am going to accept what St. Paul says about women. As John Stuart Mill said, if that means I go to hell, then to hell I will gladly go.
Well, as you said, these things ought to be taken in context. And I would say, the Apostle Paul is saying some radical things for his day, such as that the husband's body belongs to his wife and the wife's to her husband. And even those injunctions about silence, they're within the same, of course, uneducated women speaking up. He does allow.
Come on, Paul. I've gone into your Baptist churches and I've said, how do you treat women? I went to one and they said, oh, it's terrific. We have 5 women PhDs on our staff. And I said, how many ministers do you have? And he said to me, we have not felt the urge to call women as ministers. That's what I mean about organized religion. I just don't want any part of that,
I do agree that there are problems with organized religion, and I'm an egalitarian.
You believe in women? Do you believe in women priests, Paul?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well,
quite
Junia,
happy.
for example, Junia, Romans 16, Paul talks about Junia, who is known among the apostles. She's called an apostle. She is, you have Aquila and Priscilla. Priscilla is one who is teaching Apollos, who is Paul's successor at Corinth. And we can go into a lot of detail on here, and but I do think, yes, there are some contextual considerations here, but we should probably be talking about science and Christianity.
It is science and Christianity, Paul. Don't equivocate. We're talking about the status of women. We're talking about women, are men and women equal? I can't think of a bigger scientific question than that.
Sure,
I mean, what is the status of men and women? And
Michael, how would you,
science and religion?
Michael, how would you qualify giving science authoritative dominion over pronouncing what men and women are?
I don't do that. Well, I do at a certain level. I think that what you do is you have to take the facts or science, as it were, as your basic substratum. That's why I could never accept Noah's flood as something literally true, because I think it's taken science. But that's just the beginning, isn't it? I mean, I think the story of Noah is the most wonderful story. I tell people again and again, the story of Noah is God sees things are going wrong. He wipes them all out. And then what happens at the end, the bit you don't get when you're in Sunday school? Noah gets himself blind drunk, stark naked. His son comes in and laughs at him and everything like that. In other words, sin is still with us. In other words, I take Noah's flood to be a story about simplistic solutions don't work. March into Iraq and we'll put it right. No. So I take Noah's flood to be deeply meaningful. But of course, I take the science as, if you like, as a substratum. Is it more important? It's part of the important. It has a particular role. Is a woman more important because she has the babies? No. But it doesn't mean to say that men should strive to have babies.
Well, I know Ken has already asked a question or two, but he had another one here. Ken, if you want to talk about this now, you had a question about Bruce Gordon's section that you wanted to run by Paul, and it dealt with occasionalism. Do you want to address that now or ask Paul about that? Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry.
You're muted, Ken.
There
Thanks.
you go.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether it's appropriate to ask in this context since Bruce isn't here to defend himself.
I'm not an occasionalist either, so
okay.
You can let Bruce speak for himself.
Oh, he's muted. You're muted again.
Trying to unmute.
There we go.
I'm just wanting to know how somebody would defend a position like that. I didn't realize there were Christians today who held sort of an occasionalist view. And the idea being, for those who may not have read the book, that there are no natural laws per se. God is moment by moment causing everything to happen. From one event doesn't cause another. God is directly intervening in each event and causing each subsequent event. And so I'm wondering, and perhaps that's not a good perfect characterization of his view, but that was typically associated with Islamic philosophers in the Middle Ages. Al-Ghazali, I forget the name, Al-Ghazali. And so I was surprised to see it come up in a Christian context. But the implication is, I've spoken with some Christians about the fact that 2/3 of all embryos are spontaneously aborted within the womb. And doesn't that make God out to be an abortionist? And they say, well, no, because there's a difference between actively causing something to happen and letting something happen, just not being directly responsible for it. But if God is moment by moment causing everything in the world, in the universe to happen, then how do you absolve God from the charge of abortion if he's actively causing these deaths to happen within the womb?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the broader problem is that the things that God created don't actually have any sort of being in themselves and so I do find it problematic, this occasionalism, and I don't accept. I think that God gives certain entities, plants, animals, certain powers and capacities, and doesn't have any need, as it were, or doesn't need to continually create to show that he alone has being, and that all else depends upon him. He can sustain things in being without continually creating them. So I have problems with it too.
Did that help, Ken?
Does anybody else among the Christians in the group have that view and could defend it?
I mean, Jonathan Edwards took a view that, some people have charged him with taking an occasionalist view, and there are others who have taken that view as well. So it is out there.
I think for me, Ken, I think it's scripture is not, as you know, it's not. Sometimes I think this question has behind it, not that you're doing this, but in general, as I've addressed this question, that implied in that is this sort of quest for a kind of scientific knowledge, that we want this sort of exact sort of way of knowing how God, but he's very general in scripture, that he upholds all things by the word of his power, sustains all things in Colossians and Hebrews. But for me, just me, as considering an omniscient, omnipotent being upholding the universe, is not a perspective that I'm privy to. So coming up with a sort of mechanism as to a causal mechanism, if you will, whether it's philosophical, theological, or more in an empirical sense, I think there is a sort of closed door there, for me anyway, in terms of a kind of epistemic limitation to how I would know that God upholds things. And I'm somewhere between, I think I would agree mostly with Dr. Copan that there are problems if you try to get too specific about things that are not specifically revealed. And so for me, I'm comfortable. I think I would agree with Michael Ruse here that there is a little bit of mystery in how God functions in the world, but giving our penchant for scientific exactitude, if you would, that sometimes we quest after knowledge in a much more specific content than is warranted because of the noetic effects of sin, that we want to know like God knows. And we get ourselves into trouble sometimes when we do that. So I'm comfortable with a little mystery there without being too particular. And I think I would go as far as saying that, God upholds everything, but precisely how the dominoes fall from his throne down to here, I don't know. I don't know if that satisfies you. It's a good answer or not. I don't know.
So let me make a comment on that because, I'm not an occasionalist, but I understand also what Daniel just said. However, as science has progressed, what we need to consider is looking at it maybe in terms of what's called a vertical integration and not horizontal. So we've explored down to the quanta or more on a horizontal basis, and we find all these potential particles, which actually, can be equated to some of Aristotle's thinking about, potential and active units. But what we may find is that as God sustains things, as much as, let's say, the floor is sustaining the table, which is sustaining the coffee, which is sustaining the liquid within the coffee, and that there's actually a series of integrated scientific reasons for this that we can describe. But the point is that there is a potential to look at these things as a vertical integration and not just horizontal.
We have a question from John Hall. I think if we didn't skip anybody, but
we skipped Neil.
Okay,
did Ostman or Ostman?
Neil, but that was just Neil, right?
Yeah, that
there.
was just Neil.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we
no,
can
but
go.
he had another question.
Oh, did Neil? You have another question, Neil?
You're muted.
Mute.
Yeah, so I wanted to know from Paul if he considers himself a nominalist or not.
No, I'm not a nominalist.
Sorry, not Paul. I meant to direct that to Michael. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, would you mind telling me what a nominalist is?
Well, the classical definition is that much like Luther, he comes from Occam, where basically there are no universals. They're just names for things, as opposed to some reality at that point.
Well, I don't, obviously they're universals. I mean, a human being. I mean, I'm talking to human beings at the moment. I'm not talking to dogs, although I did notice somebody who seems to have left had a dog showing. But I mean, so obviously there are universals at that level. But I'm worried about going any further. Are you asking me, do I believe in Platonic forms, for instance? Do I think that in talking about humans, I'm talking about some irrational but non-physical notion that we participate in? I'm inclined to say no, but because I don't think we need that. So yeah, if that's deny being a nominalist, obviously I am. But if you're saying, do I believe, you see, the trouble is this kind of medieval language, and I'm not being snarky or whatever, somehow it just doesn't fit with me in those sorts of ways. I mean, what would it mean to say I'm a nominalist about human beings as opposed to what a realist or whatever? I believe in the existence of humans. I believe that there are certain characteristics that make us humans, that we use the word human rather than, what shall I say, dog or something like that. So yeah, but do I believe that there's some Platonic form of dog or human? No. Do I believe that? Obviously, do I believe it's in the mind of God? No, because I don't believe, at least I don't believe in that kind of God. But as I say, somehow it's not a big issue for me, not a big issue in the way that obviously evil is.
Yeah, I believe we were coming up to a question if John Hall wanted to ask about with Michael about your understanding of the reality of evil and also its connection to ethics. So, John, do you want to unmute and maybe ask that question now?
Yes, sir, I do. I appreciate you guys being here. First off, this is my first time being on here. I've been trying to get in, so just a small snippet about me, just so that Dr. Ruse can further understand my question. So I've been an atheist most of my life. I've only recently become a Christian in the past 5 years or so through a long series of events, but obviously primarily focused on the problem of evil. So I know that he was, at least he grew up in a Quaker's, conditions. Well, I grew up in the opposite, and I've been a career soldier. I've deployed to Iraq. I've been there for 2 years. I have had the mispleasure of taking lives of other human beings. I've carried the dead. I've seen people burned alive. Evil is a very serious issue for me. And the way that I went about philosophically, because I was a nihilist, evil was an illusion. And so my question is more focused on somebody who, like me, has come from the curtails of war into an area that was desolate and terrible. The concept of evil and the pressure of evil is spread throughout all of the world at this point. How do you go about compartmentalizing the reality of evil and the intellectual satisfaction of trying to give it an answer that you find intelligible, satisfactory, almost in a way doing away with the problem of evil? Do you have a place like this, or is it still a problem that you're unable to really solve, and it's still you're seeking intellectual satisfaction in the reality of evil itself?
Well, I think that one could give explanations of how these things that we would label evil happen. I mean, obviously, if we're going to talk about the struggle for existence and what should we say, the antelope being brought down by the lion or whatever, or as I grew up, Walt Disney, Bambi's mother got shot by the hunter. I think we can explain those, what shall I say, naturalistically. I think the terrible things you've been talking about, I think we can talk about and give naturalistic explanations. Is there any ultimate meaning beyond this with a capital M? Well, that's my question. Richard Dawkins says no, that happens, to use a technical phrase. That's the way it is. But you or let's say Paul want to say, no, it's all I could make sense of it in an eschatological vision, that although it may seem awful now, Anne Frank's death, but when I put it in the overall context of God of love, creation, and all of these things, I talk about free will and, Himmler's free will. It's better that Himmler have free will than, Anne Frank be saved. All of these things I can get. I don't find that helpful when it comes to the capital M meaning of evil. I just don't have one. I just don't have one. Now, John, I can understand somebody of your experiences says, I just can't, and it's not weakness, God knows. I can understand somebody like you saying, I just can't go on unless at some level I could put this in a context. That it's so, it's so awful for me. I understand what you're doing. It's just, I can't. That's where I'm at. Do I feel that I'm letting the side down? No. I think that I'm as genuine as I can be. And all I can say is, that's where we're at.
Certainly.
I don't have ultimate metaphysical answers.
As a caveat, I'm not, so in my experience, I'm not trying to take Christianity and placing it into this existential hole that I'm unable to deal with, and as you said, can't go on. No, actually, I could have gone on just fine as a nihilist. It was perfectly reasonable to me to believe that evil was an illusion. There was nothing I really had to satisfy. But for me, as I begin to entertain the Christian thought of the reality of evil, I found it significantly more intelligible, more intellectually satisfactory. In fact, on the opposite hand, I actually find it to be more emotionally difficult to deal with, to think just like you, a reality of a God who is love.
But you see, I'm not saying that evil is an illusion. I think it exists. The question is there any explanation? I mean, it's like the body-mind question. I don't think the mind is an illusion. I just can't explain it. It's just, as I said, the world is not only queerer than I think it is, it's queerer than I could think it is. These things happen, and I have no explanation. As far as I know, as I said, SH, asterisk T happens. Okay? I don't want to upset James. He's looking terribly worried. But, these things happen. And all I can say is I have no answer to them. I just don't have an answer.
But my original question is, does it bother you?
At one level, it obsesses me. Does it make me feel guilty or something like that? No, I can't honestly say that it does. But it's a question that, I keep scratching at. But I've said that's my Quaker background.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Michael, can you ground ethics, or can you look at science or evolution or survival of the fittest or anything and find a ground for saying that what happened to Anne Frank was wrong? I mean, we intuitively feel it's wrong, but do we have a reason? If there's no God, why is it wrong?
I believe in morality. I think that we live in a moral system. Like David Hume, ultimately, I think it's emotions. I think it doesn't have an objective foundation. But I'm in the game. It's rather like, if I'm playing baseball, if there's 3 outs, I can't say, yes, but I want a 4th out. That's not on. It's part of the rules. I belong there. So as far as I'm concerned, what happened to Anne Frank was a tragedy, and I blame Hitler, I blame Himmler, and all of these things. I think they were morally evil. So obviously, just as I want to say, I think Sophie Scholl was morally good. But if you say to me, yes, but doesn't this have some transcendent meaning or something like that? Richard Dawkins says no. I say, don't know.
So in your view, then there could be a transcendent, ultimate good that God is doing that you just don't. None of us can actually know what that is, but potentially it's there.
Yes, as I say, coming from a Quaker background, I'm very empathetic to mysticism. The idea that there is something, that the world is queerer than we could know it is. So yes, the answer is yes, but it doesn't mean to say I go to bed at night and say, it's okay, God, I tell everybody that I don't believe in you, but you know secretly I do. No, I don't say that. I don't know whether God exists or not. But at a certain level, yeah, I'm a bit of a snob. I think there's something morally worthy of the kind of position I'm taking. I think that this is the position that I've taken. I don't want to say you're all, weak because you have to make this up because you're scared of death and something like that. I think Richard Dawkins would say, I don't think that any more than I think Richard Dawkins is doing it just because, it makes him famous. But all I can say is, this is my way. And yes, I'm proud to be in the position that I am. Not cocky or confident. This is my position. And if you like, this is my way of using the talents I've been given.
Michael, somewhat related to this, you said earlier, talking about a worthwhile life. In your view, how do we constitute or how do we determine what constitutes a worthwhile life?
There is no ultimate, Brady. I mean, we're condemned to freedom. We have to make these decisions ourselves. But we are human beings. And so I think as part of our human nature, we know what we should do. It's something that we share. So, but ultimately, if you say to me, but how do I know in any moral sense that this is, I have no answer. I have no answer. As I say, my life is a mystery. By the way, Brady, next time you come on, I expect you to wear a toga. If you're going to show that, I mean, this for me is inauthentic in a very heavy 19th century philosophical sense.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, thank you for your answer. So I guess if I understand you correctly, then what you're saying is that it's really one subjective determination whether it's better to watch 30 guys, beat up each other at a football game on a Saturday, or take a walk in the park or read a book. Is that a fair way to understand you?
Yeah, of course. I'm a philosopher, but don't forget, I'm a snob. I think I'm superior to everybody. I mean, we're the brightest people on campus. How could I not think that? So obviously, I'm not. I'm not entirely consistent. But yes, so I do think. What shall I say? Reading the Critique of Pure Reason is better than sitting down in front of the telly. Okay. Yes, I do.
I'll let Paul say amen to your previous comment, and thank you so much for your answer.
No, I appreciate that, those comments. If I may just ask, Michael, so you do believe in a moral realm, although following David Hume, who takes a subjective understanding of morality that's rooted in emotion, in the passions, rather than in reason. That's your so there's fundamentally no.
Yes, but I do think morals are an interesting form of emotion. I think emotion is, I don't like spinach, or my wife, for instance, doesn't like sprouts. Okay, I love sprouts. My wife hates sprouts. Okay, so I think that this is just emotion. I think, what shall I say? Fiddling with little girls is morally wrong. Yes, it's an emotion, but it's something, as John Mackey said, that we objectivize and that we see as morally wrong. So it's an emotion, but it's an emotion of a particular kind. Now, if you say, is there any ultimate justification other than evolution for this? No, but here we are, we're in this situation, we can't get away from it, so go with it. And so at that level, I'm something of a pragmatist. I don't believe in moral foundations. I certainly believe in morality.
Yeah, I guess I just was wanting to push a little bit on that perhaps given the strength, and Robert Audi talks about these moral intuitions that do reflect and other theists too, that these reflect a moral world in which we inhabit that goes beyond what mere humans experience, but those emotions actually, I think that those, in a sense, if you will, true emotions, not related to spinach or sprouts, but those that relate to those, those deep moral intuitions that, could it be that they as pointers to a moral and objective moral realm?
You're trying to push
ourselves.
me into something, Paul, that I just don't accept. And that's the way I keep pushing this thing, so I lose everything. Hold on. So launch meeting, hold on, I'll get you back again. Oh God, there you are. Okay, but the thing is, Paul, let's put it this way. You meet your wife or a young woman and you fall desperately in love with her. She is the most beautiful, the most wonderful person in the world. Now, are you going to say, oh, well, this is just emotion, this is just illusion, it's just not meaningful? Even though, let's say, Brady, in his wisdom, says, oh, no, I don't think she's the most beautiful. Apart from anything else, she's got, let's say she's got black hair, and the only beautiful women are those with blonde hair, Marilyn Monroe or something. So I don't want to dismiss your emotions or your feelings or say it's just illusory because Brady Blevins doesn't share this. So I think you're trying to push me into something which, as it were, that I don't accept because it doesn't have an objective referent. It doesn't mean that it's not real in some your affection, your absolute conviction that this woman is the most beautiful person you've ever met, and you are so lucky that she likes you. What am I going to say? It's just emotion, it's just illusion, just pass on. No, it's not. Despite right. Brady Blevins, really rather unfair and nasty views.
Well, I appreciate your indulging me, and I didn't want to push beyond, I don't know, beating a dead horse. But I just was curious about whether any of these moral intuitions could serve as pointers beyond themselves to that's all I wanted to know. Yeah.
I don't think they could. And incidentally, folks, I'm falling into my usual teaching practice. I always found somebody like Brady in my class who I knew had got a good sense of humor that I could tease and everybody else would enjoy. So Brady, I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it.
I'm not a nominalist. This is, I'm a realist about this.
Michael, it's okay. I'm a teacher too, and I do the exact same thing. So I don't mind getting a little taste of my own medicine. So I'm learning from the master here.
It makes teaching just so much fun, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. Absolutely.
People think as a teacher you're just giving out knowledge. You're not doing that at all, are you?
You're entertaining.
It's such a privilege.
It really is. It really is.
Sorry, folks. Get back to what we're talking about seriously.
Michael, I do have a question for you. I know that's probably outside of your realm of scientific expertise. I know you've spoken and written a lot more about evolution than cosmology, but I'm interested just off the top of my head to hear what you have to say about multiverse theories that are espoused by, like Sean Carroll recently with his latest book comes out with endorsing the Everett many worlds interpretation of the universe. Neil deGrasse Tyson is making the rounds with his new book talking about multiverse. Max Tegmark talks about a mathematical universe with many selves in it. What do you think of this, the multiplicity of unobservable worlds that some people are postulating are filled with unobservable selves? What do you think of all of that philosophically?
Yeah, I'm open to it. It makes very little difference to my life. At some level, it certainly seems to me to make a lot of sense and to explain, all of the fine-tuning argument, which the fine-tuning argument for me is a little bit like the women. It had to be true because the women reported on Jesus on that Sunday morning. Somehow, I just don't like that kind of argument. So if multiverses gets rid of that, I'm all in favor of it. Is it true? I'm not a physicist. It could be, but it's not something that my life depends on in some sort of way. I think it's an interesting thing because it presumably means that all over the universe, in these multiverses, there's not just one Michael Ruse or Brady Blevins. There's an infinite number of them. God, maybe God does exist after all, Brady.
I have a question for you, Michael. You were talking earlier about, I think you said several times about how we're all captured by our freedom. I don't remember exactly how you put that, but we're all victims of our own freedom or something like that. But my question is, have you ever wrote on or addressed the determinism of like Sam Harris in his book Free Will?
Have I ever looked at that?
Yeah, address that, the determinism of free will. Of course, Sam Harris says that free will is illusionary.
My colleagues are all into this. One of my colleagues, Al Miley, got $10 million from the Templeton Foundation to talk about this. Frankly, free will strikes me as a little bit like the body-mind problem. As far as I'm concerned, I think everything's determined. I think David Hume was right, and that as far as I'm concerned, free will means no more than just we're not in chains. Any more than that, I'm inclined to think is not a particularly interesting question. But as I say, I'm not a metaphysician, so I wouldn't pretend to know any much more than you do. But I think, my position is like David Hume. I think my position, actually, of all things, is fairly close to Jonathan Edwards. As a Presbyterian, he believed in determination, but as a Presbyterian, he believed that we've sinned, and to sin, we had to do it freely. So I'm easy with that.
Yeah, but that would certainly speak to the ethical issues you were talking about with Hitler and Frank, and if were these not real choices anyway? Were these only apparent choices?
Well,
both the good and the bad.
What do I say? Of course, they were choices. If you don't have causal determination, then what you do is not free. It's crazy. If, for instance, let's say, sorry, Brady, I won't keep picking on you.
It's okay, I can take it.
Let's take somebody who looks really important. Ron, you're perfect. Look at Ron, he's perfect.
He is important. He is.
If Ron goes down to, downtown Chicago, or wherever it is, and tears off all his clothes and says, I am, what shall I say, George Washington incarnate. And you say, well, what? Did you do this freely? No, it was not causally bound. It was just happened. That's not free will. That's craziness. If there's no cause, I blame Ron for what he did because he was brought up properly, because his mum and dad told him, you don't do this sort of thing. His teachers told, and yet he still did it. That means he's wrong. But if it's just, there's no causal determination, he just did it. As I say, that's not free will. That's nuttiness. So I don't think you can have moral responsibility without some kind of causal determination.
I just would like to know who told you I did that.
I know. I'm like, what is it? The shadow knows, he knows the secrets which live in the hearts of men. I've been in North America for too long, if I can make that kind of joke.
Hey, I've got a question for both of you. How, and I think you did deal with it at the end in a section, Paul, but I'll start with Michael. What will you see as the difference between science and scientism, and how do those differences interact with how we view the options of Christianity and science and how they relate?
I take scientism at some level trying to make a kind of secular religion out of science. It's all bound up with secular humanism and that sort of thing, sort of stuff that Philip Kitcher, for one, has been pushing. And I just don't have any time for that. I say, having given up one religion, I'm damned if I'm going to jump into another. I've written several books about making, Darwin Day, February the 12th, Darwin. I refuse absolutely to give talks on Darwin Day. Any more, incidentally, folks, then now I refuse absolutely to review books when they say, we'll give you the ebook. If I don't get the real book, I'm not reviewing it. But Darwin Day, I mean, okay, it's like Jesus Day, you know. The next thing is we'll have Richard Dawkins Day. He'd love that. But I mean, I just don't buy into making a quasi-secular religion to substitute for Christianity. As I say, I think it's much better to be like me, to say, I just don't have the answers. I don't have a belief. I'm not a Unitarian. I'm not going to go along and sing hymns and, you know, which don't mention God and tie pink ribbons onto trees. You know, it's not for me, just not for me.
Yeah, Paul, what do you think on that, along those lines?
Well, I think Michael is correct about the quasi-religious status of scientism in our day that has been so elevated to unreasonable proportions. Of course, it's self-refuting if you take the strong view that says that only science can give to us knowledge. And of course, that very conclusion is not drawn from scientific observation. It's actually a philosophical assumption. So it is it's amazing how you'll have such strident proponents of that view, but they can't, you know, they don't want to acknowledge the fact that the view that they're embracing is, you know, arbitrary, self-contradictory, and reduces all knowledge to, you know, our empirical experience. And there's so much more, as Michael could tell you, that philosophy is a legitimate pathway to knowledge. Well, I think that we have to restrict it to science. I use the example with my students of a fishing net. If you're trying to catch minnows, you're going to have a smaller mesh to catch them. If you want to catch, you catch bigger fish with that too. But if you're going to use bigger mesh, like 4-inch or 5-inch squares, you're not going to catch minnows. But yet a lot of people who espouse this view of scientism say this large mesh is the only way to catch fish. And of course, a lot of other things are going to pass through, but they think we've got, you know, this is really the way to do fishing. This is the really way to know things. And they miss a lot of things because they've so restricted their viewpoint that they don't allow anything else in.
James, I don't want to be a party pooper, but it's 9:30
Sure you do.
now in my time, and I'm 80 years old. I'm starting to flag. How much longer are we going on for?
We usually go until 8 our time, so that's another 20 minutes or so. So
9.
Yeah, I think we'll try to speed things up for that though. So I do think that John Hall had another question or either comment. So John, you want to unmute and ask us?
Certainly, sir. A question for you, Dr. Ruse. Obviously you find yourself to be objective. I think we all do in some sense. But if you were going to argue for the opposing side, if you were going to say in your mind, what is the most compelling evidence for the general belief of theism, or let's even say polytheism or deism? What is it that compels you to be attracted to the idea that it might be true? What's specifically the thing that grabs you?
Well, I think it would be the whole question of existence, and saying whenever I come across something strange, I assume there must be a reason for it. If I walked into a room and let's say I saw a bottle of milk had been knocked off the counter and smashed, I would immediately say, surely there has to be a reason for this. What is it? So here I am. There has to be a reason for it. But notice, I don't necessarily feel compelled to say it must be Christianity. Why couldn't it be Judaism? Why couldn't it be Islam? Why couldn't it be Buddhism? I mean, you know, that there, at some level there is, the world is, but nevertheless there's, you know, the ways that it works and all of these sorts of things. So the fact that I feel that it has to be an explanation would not necessarily plunge me straight into the Christian belief. I mean, I could be a deist or something like this and say, yes, I believe in a God. I believe that there are certain people who are obviously have an insight at some level, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, others like this. But ultimately, they're just human beings like I am. And they, if you like, it's like a Kuhnian paradigm. They've got a particular snapshot of what's going on, but we don't have the whole. So if that would be my position, yes, there has to be a reason, but it doesn't necessarily follow that it has to be Christianity.
Certainly. But I do believe that you're actually following the same trajectory that I was following as an atheist, is that I was most compelled by this idea of teleology, that the universe and all things seem to be constructed in such a way as to give rise to this incredible symphony of deliberateness and accuracy and teleology. And for me, I followed the same idea. At first, I was a Buddhist, and I was a Buddhist for a couple of years, and I was very satisfied with that. And then I began to explore the various religions, kind of making this collage of various intellectual thought. And I ultimately strayed away from Christianity as long as I could, because with you, I sympathize in a lot of Christian history and Christian hypocrisy and things that I found beef within the biblical context. But for me, it is the same. So I think we agree on that. Is that I think teleology, or the fine tuning argument, I think is the most compelling.
As I said, the fine tuning strikes me as like on the level of those women seeing Jesus when he rose. If belief in the Almighty depends on, certain constants of the fine tuning, somehow it strikes me as shabby, apart from the fact that Stephen Weinberg says it's not so fine tuned after all. But, if your religion, you see, that's what I mean by being a Kierkegaardian. If I'm going to be a Christian, I'm going to make a leap of faith. I'm not going to depend on those crappy little arguments about, it must be true because women had no status in that society and because they report. Come on, give me. It's a theological difference I have here. If your belief in the existence of God depends on these wretched constants like that, then somehow that's shabby. That's really shabby. I mean, at least
I would agree, but
Saul of Tarsus was struck blind. Now, I can respect that. A guy who says, I'm on my way to persecute Christians. I'm struck blind. Now, I've got a certain respect for a guy like that in a way that I don't have for somebody who's grubbing around with the constants.
Well, God used Moses when he was 80, so you're on deck.
Well, there you go. I know.
You're on deck.
If I might jump in, I think that you're pointing to reason, a reason for this, and of course John reinforcing that. That's not going to lead you directly to the Christian God, the biblical God, but it is something that is certainly. It certainly coincides with that. It's not not a far step from that. I think what we need to do is, as we look at things like the beginning of the universe began 13.8 billion years ago, and I'd throw in fine tuning. I would throw in the moral argument for God's existence. I throw in the argument from beauty. I throw in the argument from rationality. I throw in the argument for from human dignity and worth and so forth. That there's a whole constellation of factors that go into this. It's not just I'm picking out fine tuning and hanging everything on that. There's also personal experience that goes along with that. And obviously the Apostle Paul, who was confronted by Jesus on the road to Damascus, also said that ever since the creation of invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made. So he wasn't saying it's either this or that. He's seeing this as a part of a broader picture that corroborates and confirms. And so then the question becomes, if there is something out there, something that got it all going, that put it into place, is there any way that we can come to something more specific about that being? When you look at the contenders, I'd say Jesus of Nazareth rises to the top in terms of the remarkable claims that he made for himself, that his opponents said, who could forgive sins but God alone, or you, a mere man, are making yourself out to be God. That was that recognition. And Jesus himself saying, the one who has seen me has seen the Father. So if you're looking for a contender, I think, Jesus rises to the surface. You're saying, well, why should I take Jesus seriously? You come to the resurrection. The resurrection vindicates those claims, and it's not just the testimony of the women. There are other factors as well that reinforce the richness and the power of the resurrection. That sin, death, evil do not have the final word on this matter. And so, anyway, I could go beyond this, and perhaps you're flagging beyond wanting to respond.
Just a moment, Paul. I'm an Orthodox Jew, or I'm a regular Jew.
Right.
I live in a Christian society, so I have spent quite some time trying to understand Christianity. I've read the New Testament, all of these things, and they don't, at the end of the thing, I say, I find it very inspiring. I think that obviously Jesus was a charismatic leader or whatever it is, but I'm not convinced that he is the Son of God in the way that they claim. Now, are you saying, therefore, that the Jew has denied their Lord? Are you saying that the Jew at some level is either intellectually, morally, religious, failing at this level?
I wouldn't presume to make a judgment on this person. I would say if there is a genuine, sincere seeker, God's got that taken care of. I don't have to make the determination. And and Martin Luther, he even said this about Cicero. He said that he thought he greatly admired Cicero, and he says that I hope that you forgive him for his sins. God has ways.
He didn't say that about the Jews. He didn't say that about the Jews. Though,
you're right. He did
sure
not.
As hell didn't say that about the Jews.
I'm not taking Luther's position on that, by the way, just in case you're confused, Michael. But I would say that he did leave, someone like Luther did leave open the possibility of post-mortem opportunity, that for those who have been pseudo-evangelized, those who have been unevangelized, those who have been misinformed about Jesus, those who perhaps gotten to a certain point.
You see, this is the trouble, Paul. You talk about being misinformed. I am the Dalai Lama or somebody like this. So obviously, I know about Christianity. I've worked through it. I've looked at it, and I just am not convinced. Am I misinformed? Am I using my reason wrongly? Am I tainted with original sin? Or any of these? The thing is, Paul, you're going to end up by saying, I have made a mistake. And that makes me super uncomfortable.
Well, I mean, when you're saying you have made a mistake,
what you're saying is to anybody who has made a serious study of Christianity, and they cannot at the end up with saying Jesus, yes, indeed, was the Son of God in part of the Trinity, who says that you're saying at some level they've made a mistake. Either they didn't take the argument seriously, they weren't clever enough, they're tainted with original sin, or they're ignorant, or they're proud, or whatever. You have to say that, Paul. If you're going to say I am right and you are wrong.
Well, I mean, you're obviously saying that I am wrong about certain things, and that's fine.
Yeah, but I don't. Yeah, but the point is, Paul, I don't claim to have some kind of divine intuition about this. Yeah,
I don't claim to have it, but I'm not claiming divine intuition.
I'm a Popperian. Everything is up for revision. I mean, I go with it now, but I could be wrong.
How much of it, Michael?
Let me just if I can just jump in before your final comments here. I know we're running short on time. I know that there's a big discussion about peer disagreement and in discussions of epistemology and so forth. Who is my epistemic peer? I do think that I don't know if you can actually achieve that kind of parity when it comes to equality. We come with do our own analysis of certain things, the Christian faith or whatever, with a whole host of experiences. Maybe somebody who had a deep encounter with evil early on that could not be shaken, that is just so profoundly traumatized that person. A negative experience with parents or whatever that had so soured them. There's a whole array of experiences that could shape how people look at this. So it's not as though we're all looking at this with, again, pure objectivity and so forth. What I'm simply trying to put forward is, I think there are good reasons for taking something like the bodily resurrection of Jesus seriously. God's going to sort out those discrepant voices. I don't have to do that, but it's not as though there is a lack of objective warrant for the claims that Christians do make when it comes to, say, something like the resurrection.
I had a question for you on that too, Michael. One of the things that I think has helped me in being part of the book club is, and I've shared this before, but all my ideas sound brilliant in church. But then when I come to the book club and throw some of these ideas out, I'm getting some really, really strong pushback, and it makes me rethink some of the things that I'm saying. So I think that's a benefit. That's
he's got to run it by Ken. Ken is going to check.
Yeah, Ken. Jim Hall. But I've heard some real good responses, which is helps me. I hope to be a better thinker. But how much of it could be confirmation bias? I mean, you said several times, and in the book you said you hope you don't want the Christian God to be true. So for all of us, me and you, how much does our emotional or volitional decision-making play into this is what we want, and lo and behold, that's the evidence I happen to see. I see that in my own life.
When I say I don't want the Christian God to be true, what I mean is, I don't want a God who claims to be all-powerful and all good and lets Anne Frank die in Bergen-Belsen. I just don't want that. If you're going to talk to me more about a kind of God of Whitehead or process theology, where that somebody like these people who wants to say that God is striving, that we are co-creators of God. I'm not sure that I accept it, but at least at some level I could say, okay, if that were true, I could live with that. But
it strikes me more as an emotional argument, though. It's just like, I agree with you that it was tragic what happened to Anne Frank, but let's say she lives to be 95 and then dies. I don't know that I'm much happier about that.
No, well, I am, because there's that nice little girl who lived all the way through in a terrible situation, wrote those wonderful things, and then ends up, dying in a concentration camp. A God who claims to be all powerful and all loving, and let that happen. Somehow, I just don't want an explanation. That's what I mean about process theology.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I agree with you how tragic that was, and maybe it's only a little bit better. But if she had lived, instead of to be 14 or 21 or 30, if she had lived to be 95, she still dies. It's the same end result.
No, yes.
I never read an obituary that
it's not the same end result. She's lived through the 50s and 60s when Holland or the Netherlands, maybe she would have emigrated to Canada like a lot of people from Holland did, and she could have had a full life. She could have had children. She could have had a good job. She could have been a writer like Margaret Atwood or something. It's not the same, friend. She died, typhoid was it, in Bergen-Belsen at the age of, how old was she, 15 or whatever the age was. A good all-powerful God doesn't let that happen. Emotion, yes, it's emotion, but I'm allowed to have emotion when I see something that I think is morally wrong or unacceptable.
Yeah, my own experience is that every time I read an obituary, there's a bit of Anne Frank to it. Whether they were 30 or 50 or 70, it just seems like an awful waste.
No, there's no, when I die, there's no Anne Frank about my death. I've had a good life. I've had a full life. I've had children, a loving wife. I've been able to do these things. I've had a good run for my money. I mean, I don't particularly want to die, whatever, but I'm not being cheated in the way that Anne Frank has. So if God does exist, I can look at him in the eye, or maybe he doesn't want me to look him in the eye. And I can say, thank you, God, you gave me the chance. I tried to use my talents. We're all fair and square, but God, you shouldn't have let Anne Frank suffer like that.
Michael, do you think the idea of omnipotence, God being omnipotent in terms of power, would include restraint, knowing that he's going to rectify things? Do you think that could be an acceptable?
Oh, come on, Daniel. Come on. There's a little child there who's suffering, and you're going to say, well, this is okay. I'm going to let her suffer because I see down the road that the parents are going to feel really guilty, and there's going to be laws passed not to have this. So this is a good thing. So restraint. No, come on, Daniel. Even if it turned out well, you're still, let's put me there. I'm still morally wrong if I didn't help that child right there and then.
Okay. Well, any final words for us, Paul?
Well, again, there's a whole literature on the problem of evil, and this only scratches the surface. And there are obviously responses to this, and I'm sure Michael has dipped into that literature as well. But one of the things that I appreciate about the Christian is that despite some of the perplexities and challenges that relate to the problem of evil, I do find that the existence of God and a standard of goodness, a kind of design plan, gives to us a framework by which we can judge something to be evil. And we also see that the God of Scripture is one who does actually step into this world, face injustice and suffering himself. That even when Paul is confronted to Damascus by Jesus, Jesus says, "Why are you persecuting me?" That there is an entering into the suffering of his creatures, and that God goes to the very depths. And of course, we're celebrating that this weekend, that God is willing to go to the place of degradation, nakedness, the appearance of being cursed on a cross in order to rescue humanity. And that, as Tom Holland has said, he's not a Christian, but he's an atheist historian. But he calls himself a Christian because his understanding of morality, of intrinsic dignity of human beings and so forth, has been shaped by the crucified Jesus. Rather than coming to punish, Jesus takes punishment of humanity upon himself and seeks to rescue humanity. And so Tom Holland said he used to be enamored of the Greco-Roman world, but the more closely he studied it, the more he realized that it was a world that did not with any kind of kindness or compassion upon the miserable, the handicapped, and so forth. And he said it was Jesus Christ, his death on the cross and so forth, that utterly transformed our view of humanity, about human dignity and worth in the West. So he says, I am proudly Christian in my outlook rather than Greco-Roman. I think there is something to that. And I think that what we have in faith actually points us to the hope for humanity and an ultimate resolution to the problem of evil, even if we have mysteries and conundrums and challenges that we have to wrestle with in this life.
Thanks, Paul.
I'm
sorry. Go ahead, please, Michael.
I was just about to say, we're starting to get into substitutionary atonement, and I'll keep going for 2 hours on that one. So okay. I think I better not, folks. It really is past my bedtime now. So,
My question for both of you, and I'll ask Michael first and then Paul. Michael, do you have any words of advice for those of us in the club, atheists and Christians? We gather once a month. You have any word of advice or wisdom that you want to share with us?
Not really, I mean, I think what you're doing is a worthwhile thing. I mean, I think you are using your talents in a proper way. So No, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was worth doing.
We really appreciate that, Michael.
Yeah.
Paul, you got anything for us?
Go ahead. I'm a teacher. It's Brady, you'll bear me out on this. It's hard work, but it's such a privilege. It is such a privilege. I mean, John Stuart Mill says, show me somebody of reasonable circumstances who is not happy, and I can guarantee I can show you somebody who thinks only of themselves. And teachers, that's the most wonderful thing. True happiness comes in giving to others, and not just teachers, but being teachers, right?
I would agree.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah. And yeah, I would again, I'm sure you've heard it all before, but I do appreciate the graciousness, the cordiality, the friendly exchange that there is, and I think that we need a lot more of that in our society. It's often so fragmented, divided. So keep up the good work.
Well, thanks to both of you, and
Good night.
good night.
Good night, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye, Michael.
Bye.
The Atheist and Christian Book Club is a production and ministry of Watchman Fellowship Incorporated, Arlington, Texas. For more information about our ministry, visit watchman.org. That's watchman with an A.org. And for more information about our book club meetings and how you can join us live for an upcoming discussion, visit atheistchristianbookclub.com. That's atheistchristianbookclub altogether.com. For Watchman Fellowship and the Atheist and Christian Book Club, I'm Daniel Ray.